Good morning, children. Well, this is my first video for the students of class 11. Before this, I have uploaded videos for class 10. And before I proceed, I would like to thank all the viewers and all the subscribers for their overwhelming response, which is basically a great morale booster for me so that I can continue with this job and reach across to all the children and help them in some way or the other. Thank you so much. So today I begin with the reader hornbill, and the first lesson is the portrait of a lady. As I read the lesson, I will explain side by side. The portrait of a lady written by Khushwant Singh. Before I begin, I would like to update you on Khushwant Singh. He was a great Indian author, lawyer, diplomat, journalist, and a politician. He was born in Pakistan in 1915 and he passed away on 20th March 2014 at the ripe age of 99. He received education at the Punjab University, Chandigarh, the King's College, London, the Dixon School of Law, and St. Stephen's College. He was honored by prestigious awards like the Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan, and the Punjab Ratna Award. His experience in 1947 during the partition of India left a great mark on his mind, and he went into writing. He initiated his writing after this incident, which must have touched him immensely. And his novel, A Train to Pakistan in 1956, was highly acclaimed. So now we begin with the lesson. The lesson is about the author and the relationship that he shared with his grandmother. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. Everybody, like, common to all. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. Why? Because he had always seen her old and he could never ever imagine her to be young and pretty and to be a young bride and to have a husband. So that was not digestible to the author. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece. Mantelpiece is a shelf that you have above the fireplace in the drawing room. He wore a big turban, a huge turban, and loose-fitting clothes. You know how in those days in Pakistan they wear these long, loose kurtas with salwars, a patani kind of an outfit. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. So if the grandmother looked old, so did the grandfather. He did not look the sort of a person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. These lines pertain to the old age. That seeing them in that condition, in that old age, nobody could ever go back to their days of youth or could imagine them in their youth. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother, being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. The thought was revolting means the thought was not acceptable, could not digest it. She often told us of the game she used to play as a child. Maybe when she discussed things with her grandson and she told him about her childhood and the game she played, it could not be taken in by the author. That seemed quite absurd, weird, and undignified on her part. Undignified because at this age she was an epitome of experience, wisdom. So to imagine her playing those childhood games was not acceptable. And we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Fables are stories which have a moralistic message to give to the readers. So she also used to tell them stories about prophets, and she also told them about her childhood and her games and her recreation, which seemed to them like stories. She had always been short and fat, plump, short in height, and slightly bent. With old age, you tend to develop a hunch with your shoulders drooping a little bit. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. There were lots and lots of wrinkles on her face, and those lines could be seen all over her face. No, we were certain, we were sure she had always been as we had known her. Old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older. They thought that this was the maximum age, she could not grow older than that. So for them, they could only imagine her in her old age. And had stayed at the same age for 20 years. And maybe she had stagnated at that point, that she just looked like that for the past 20 years and she could not grow older than that. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. This line is of great importance because when we are talking about outward beauty, we're talking about prettiness, a pretty face. But when we are talking about her being beautiful, the author is trying to tell us that this was the inner beauty that she had. She was a remarkable woman, a great woman. And it is not physical beauty which matters in the long run. It's how beautiful you are from inside. If you have a golden heart, a beautiful heart, and a generous heart, a kind heart, you're a loving person, you're a giving person, that makes you more beautiful. Because outward beauty fades away with time. But the beauty that you have within remains with you forever. So that is what the author believed about her, that she was always beautiful. She hobbled about the house in spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other telling the beads of her rosary. She hobbled about. You must have seen old ladies walking about, and they walk with a little kind of, staggering like to one side, and so that was the kind of way she walked, with one hand on the waist to balance her stoop, her hunch, and the other was always telling the beads of the rosary, mala pherna, mala japna, telling the beads of her rosary. Like how all the saints and all the religious people, when they sit down, they have to chant, then they use the Rudraksh mala, so that kind of a thing. Her silver locks are her hair, her grey hair, was scattered untidily over her pale puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Inaudible, which cannot be heard. So she said silent prayers, and we could only see the lips moving, but no sound was heard. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. Winter landscape. When you talk about a winter landscape, you can imagine a whole range of mountains, and snow-covered mountains, snow-clad mountains, looking beautiful, pure, serene, white, absolutely enchanting. So the grandmother has been compared to the winter landscape. Just as you have a whole range of mountains covered with pure white snow, she was also covered in white right from head to toe. Her silver hair, the white clothes she wore, spotless white clothes she wore, and she looked so beautiful and serene. An expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. So she was dressed from head to toe in white, and she looked so beautiful, and white, as you know, is a color of peace. So she was at peace with herself. And when are you at peace with yourself? When you're content, when you're satisfied, when there's no fire of desire. When you have desire, that's the cause of great sorrow, suffering, misery. You want more and more and more. But when you're content, then you are at peace, because you only want, maybe the grandmother only wanted to be in communion with the Lord, with God. My grandmother and I were good friends. That's the kind of relationship. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. Now we see on one side there was a rural setup, And on the other side, we will slowly proceed towards the urban setup. Initially, the author and the grandmother were living in the village. So the chores that she used to do, she used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. Now, as we proceed, I would just like to tell you that the author has spoken about the grandmother and he's told us so many aspects which reveal her character. Like she's wearing all white, so we come to know that she was a pure and content person. Then he tells us about the telling of the beads, which shows that she is a religious lady. Now he again tells us that she recited her morning prayers in a monotonous sing-song, in a dull, in one pitch only. There were no highs and lows in that song. There was no melody. In one pitch, in a very dull and a boring way, she sang the religious song while she bathed and dressed him, with the idea that the grandson would pick it up and learn it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice, but never bothered to learn it. You know how children are, how boys are. So generally, I listened because I loved her voice, but never bothered to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate. Now we're talking about very, very old times. The wooden slate. Today you know of a slate that is a black slate. But in those days, children used to use a wooden slate, which was called a takhti. And they used to write on that with a kalam. You must have done it in your alphabets when you were in nursery. Ka se kalam. So this was made out of a reed, a water plant kind of a thing, and that kalam was dipped in ink, and then they used to write on that wooden slate. And to clear the slate and to make it neat and again to reuse it, it was polished by clay. And if you all know, in Hindi that's called gachni, ki mitti, and they used to polish it with that and clean it to reuse it. So the wooden slate, which was takhti at that time, which he had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk. Then there was a tiny earthen ink pot. Now mind you, we are talking of old days, not a glass one. And a reed pen. Children, there's a misprint in the book here. They've written a red pen, but it's not a red pen. It's a reed pen, as I told you, made out of this plant. So it's a reed pen, the kalam that I was talking about. And tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. So she did everything for her grandson. She woke him up, she bathed him, she dressed him, and she got his act together by packing everything for him. After a breakfast of a thick stale chapati, maybe she used to make extra chapatis at night and she used to keep it, and that was the simple breakfast that the author got. With a little butter and sugar spread on it, simple breakfast. We went to school. We went means the grandmother accompanied the author to his school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. Now the author is telling us about her here again. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs, which shows an aspect in her character that she was kind-hearted, or she loved animals. She wanted to feed them. So that kind of a love she had in her heart and kindness. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. This is not the modern school that we have, but it was a school which was attached to the temple. The priest, there was no teacher as such, but the priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer. So basically it was, an elementary school, elementary teaching. While the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda, singing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus together, all of them in unison. Even today we get to see this, in some of the government schools and the other schools where the children, they sing together or they're reciting their tables together, all of them together in unison. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. Scriptures are the holy books, the holy texts. This again tells us about her religious nature, that she indulged in reading the scriptures. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. This time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. Naturally, they would all try to grab whatever was given to them. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. They called us there. That was a turning point in our relationship. Everything had been going straight and smooth, but now there came a turning point, a change, a twist. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. If you see, in the village, they went walking together, came back walking, but here it was an English medium school, a proper school, and used to commute to school by a motor bus. So the grandmother could no longer accompany him. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. So here again, the kindness in her is brought to the forefront that since there were no dogs available, so she used to feed the sparrows, the birds. As the years rolled by with the passage of time, passed by, we saw less of each other because the author was growing and he had a different pattern of education, so the grandmother could actually not do anything about it. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. It's very natural, like when you go back from school, how your parents ask you, okay, what did you do today? What all was taught today? So it was very natural. That was the only thing she could ask now. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning, which was totally a new thing for the grandmother. The law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. This made her unhappy. The grandmother didn't like this curriculum and this kind of teaching of science and things like that, because she was more into spirituality, she was more into religion, and she was more basically a simple person. She could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed, was troubled, perturbed that there was no teaching about God. She was sad about the whole thing and the scriptures because she wanted the children to be given religious teachings also. She was very disturbed, perturbed. To her, music had lewd associations. Lewd means base or offensive, because in those days it was believed that music was linked with harlots like prostitutes or beggars, all from the low strata. So she did not have a very high opinion of music being taught at school. She was very disturbed. To her, music had lewd associations. It was the monopoly of harlots, that's prostitutes and beggars, and not meant for gentle folk. Gentle folk means the good people of society. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. You know, she never threw a tantrum or she never reacted in a very harsh manner. She would just keep quiet. She said nothing. She rarely talked to me after that. So here we see another aspect of a character, that she knew how to control her emotions. She did not react impulsively. When I went up to university, I was given a room of my own because by then he had grown. The common link of friendship was snapped, was broken. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. You must have heard the phrase, she resigned to her fate. Accept whatever comes your way without throwing a tantrum or without making a noise about it. So she accepted her seclusion, her loneliness. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. Now that was one aspect of the work she did. She always was sitting at the spinning wheel, you know, the charkha that we talk about. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel spinning and reciting prayers. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda, breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected round her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirrupings. Now here we see a difference. In the urban setup, we come across bread being broken up into crumbs, and the sparrows were being fed on those bread crumbs. And there was great bedlam of chirruping, means noise, uproar, sound of the birds all chirping together. There was chaos. A lot of noise was created, like a pandemonium, as we say. Some birds came and perched on her legs, others on her shoulders. Now she was so friendly with them that the birds took all liberties with her. Some came and perched on her shoulder, some on her head, and they took all the liberty and the freedom to enjoy their company with the grandmother. She smiled but never shooed them away because she loved them, because that was the best time of the afternoon when she had company, the company of birds, and they were very happy in each other's company. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her, because otherwise she was secluded, she was always all alone, either reciting prayers or spinning at the wheel, and this was the only time when she had some company. When I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset, would not like it, would feel bad about it, would be heartbroken. I would be away for 5 years. And at her age, one could never tell. 5 years is a long time when the author went abroad for higher studies. And one could never tell means he was not sure that when he would come back, his grandmother would still be alive. But my grandmother could. She was not even sentimental. Now, here's another aspect of her character. She was not sentimental. She was not emotional. She had good control over her emotions. But my grandmother could also tell us about her strong willpower. She came to leave me at the railway station, but did not talk or show any emotion. Her lips moved in prayer, her mind was lost in prayer. And as you can guess, that maybe she was praying for his safety, for his journey, and that his travel would be safe. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of a rosary. Silently, she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint. Cherished, wanted to, think about it very fondly, would always remember the moist imprint, the kiss that the grandmother had planted on his forehead, as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. That was the way the author thought. But that was not so. He was mistaken. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. So she went to see him off, and then she also went to receive him. She did not look a day older, even though 5 years had passed. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me, held me tightly in her arms, embraced me, hugged me, I could hear her reciting her prayers. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer, and with frivolous rebukes. So that was the highlight of the day. Her happiness was shown that she spent some more time with the sparrows. She fed them for a longer time. That shows her inner happiness, which she shared with the birds. And with frivolous rebukes. Rebukes means to scold, but she did not scold them harshly. It was just, in fun and sport, and, when she was actually trying to be very friendly with the birds. But she, like so many times in Punjabi, you must have heard her say, Chal moya mar jana. Now that Moya Marjana is said in a very happy way also, in a very sweet way also, in a loving way also, not intending any harsh or angry intentions. In the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. Now, this is a very important sentence, because throughout the chapter we've seen her reciting inaudibly, her prayers inaudibly. But this time she did not pray. And what did she do? She collected the women of the neighborhood. She got an old drum and started to sing, beating the drum and singing. For several hours she thumped, she beat the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum. Dilapidated, it was not a new one, it was a very old one with the sagging skin at the sides. The leather was literally sagging. And sang of the homecoming of warriors. Now, this homecoming of warriors song is very symbolic, because when the warriors went out to fight, Nobody could say that they would come back alive. So when a warrior comes back home alive after fighting a war or a battle, I mean, it's always a big reason to celebrate, the victory or the coming home of the warrior. So she also believed this, like this grandson had gone abroad, and after 5 long years he was coming home. For her, it was as good as a warrior coming back home. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining, overexerting. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. So that was the only one time that we come across the grandmother not praying. She was so overwhelmed by seeing the author come back home, and she was in ecstasy. She was overjoyed, and in that process, she forgot to pray. The next morning, she was taken ill. She fell ill. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. She was running fever, but the doctor told them that it wasn't serious. But my grandmother thought differently. She had a different thought process. She told us that her end was near. Now, here we come to know another aspect of her character, that she had a very strong sense of intuition. She was intuitive, the intuition that her end was near and very soon she would be no more. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She had forgotten to pray. So she wanted to actually repent for that, not praying, and she wanted the family to leave her and let her spend her last few minutes or last few hours in prayer. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. Now, this is a very, very strong point, that she was so strong in character that she could say no to the family. And she managed to say that, I believe in the point of to let go, not to hold on to materialistic things. As we talk about things in Hindi, the moh maya, and so she did not believe in that. She just wanted to pray and be in communion with God in her last few moments, and she let go of all family ties. We protested, but she ignored our protest. She wouldn't listen to anything. She lay peacefully in bed, praying and telling her beads. Even before we could suspect, we could realize, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. It fell. A peaceful pallor spread on her face, and we knew that she was dead. There was a peaceful look on her face, a serene, calm look on her face. I mean, as if, she died very peacefully and happily. We lifted her off the bed as is customary. Now, this is a Hindu custom. Usually, they say that if a person comes to know that he's about to die, usually people lift him from the bed and put him on the floor. But even if it's not possible, then people who die, then they are lifted from the bed and they're put onto the floor. As is customary, the Hindu customs laid them on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. After a few hours of mourning, crying, lamenting over and grieving over this great tragedy or this great loss, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral, the last rites. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher. Crude stretcher, you know how they make it in the villages or even otherwise. It's usually made out of bamboo. Bamboo sticks are joined together to carry the dead body till the cremation ground. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. Now, these two sentences are again very beautiful and very symbolic. The sun was setting. It was time for the sun to set. Evening was about to, it was about to be evening. And the sun of her life had also set. So she had passed away. So the sun of her life had also set, and the room was bright, and the veranda was a blaze of golden light. As if, a great soul had passed away, that kind of a thing. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda and in a room right up to where she lay dead, and stiff because after a few hours the body begins to stiffen. Like we say, rigor mortis sets in, and the body was stiff, wrapped in the red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. There was no chirruping. Now that was the difference. Remember, we spoke about the uproar, the chaos, the noisy birds, but And on that particular day, they were absolutely silent. Felt sorry for the birds, and my mother fed some bread for them. She broke it into little crumbs, the way my grandmother used to, and threw it to them. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. Now, here again, and we say that the mother, we can stereotype her as an urban dweller. In villages and all, you must be noticing when you all go to villages and all, each one addresses each other with some kind of a relationship, dadi, nani, chachi, thai, auntie, uncle, like that. But in an urban setup, there is people are very impersonal. You don't know who's living next door, and you're not even interested to know. And we are the urban people are very much into themselves. But in a village, if something happens in one house, the entire village comes together in the hour of need or help. So here we see a stereotype of the urban lifestyle, that is the mother. She could never understand the emotions of the birds or their connection or their connect with the grandmother. She thought that they only came for bread, they only came to eat, but it was not so. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. They ignored the breadcrumbs completely. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off the dead body, they flew away quietly. It seemed as if they had come there to pay a tribute to the grandmother. They had also come to mourn. Silently, they sat around her dead body. And when she was carried away, they also flew away quietly. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. They were left uneaten. So the birds never came there only for bread. They came there for company. They came there because they were fond of the old lady, and the old lady was fond of them. They reciprocated each other's feelings. And it was a sad part when the grandmother died, and the rich tribute that they paid to the grandmother. So we see that there were phases. There were three phases. One was the village phase. Then we come on to the urban phase when they were still together, the grandmother and the grandson. And then the third phase where their friendship finally snapped. We continue with a few more important points to sum up the lesson. The first thing that I take up is the title of the lesson, Portrait of a Lady. Throughout this lesson, we've not come across any portrait. A portrait is a drawing, a sketch of a person, especially the face, head, and shoulders. The author has spoken about the portrait of his grandfather, but we've not come across any portrait in the story because the writer has created a pen picture or a pen portrait of his grandmother. A pen picture or pen portrait means that he's written about his grandmother in such details, explaining each and every feature of her character, her personality, that he's brought her alive for the readers. So that is why the title, The Portrait of a Lady, is very apt because he's described his grandmother in a detailed manner, giving us her physical appearance, then talking about her noble character, various features of her character. Thus, it is a complete portrait of a lady. The second point is the character of the grandmother. She was a person of a very noble character, a very strong character, a very high character. She had all the virtues in her. Virtues are a lot of goodness. And the writer has brought to forefront. First of all, he's described in a character sketch. When you're writing a character sketch of a person, the first thing that you begin with is the physical appearance. So she looked like any other grandmother. She had silver hair, she was dressed in white, she was a picture of serenity, and we can also say that she was a picture of divine beauty because of her serenity, her poised nature, her calm nature. She was a perfect picture of divinity. The second point is her religious nature. She was religious by nature, that we came across in the lesson, that she went to the temple, she read the scriptures, she sang religious songs, and she was always telling the beads of the rosary. Telling means counting the beads of the rosary, chanting. Then the other aspect of her character comes to the forefront, that is, she was very kind and generous. This we come to know by her attitude, having love for for God's creation, even in animals. Like she fed the dogs in the village and she fed the sparrows in the city. The next is she was very gentle and polite. Throughout the lesson, the author has not mentioned anywhere that she lost her cool or she lost her temper. Even when the birds were perching on her head and her shoulders, she did not shoo them away. So she was gentle and polite. The next important feature of her character was that she was responsible and caring. When the author's parents left him behind in her custody in the village, she looked after him very well. As we read in the chapter, she used to bathe him, dress him up, take him to school, bring him back, feed him. So she did her job meticulously. The next feature is that she was non interfering. She did not interfere or throw tantrums, even when she came to know that the school in the city did not provide any kind of moralistic education or did not teach anything about God or scriptures. She did not like it all, but she did not say a word. She just kept quiet. So she was non interfering. The other side to her character we see when she shows her displeasure by just keeping quiet about the education in the city schools is that she was basically conservative by nature. And conservative, we can say that she was orthodox because she only believed that education must be religion based, and also that she viewed music as the monopoly of harlots and beggars. So she did not have a fancy for music. The next feature is that she was very practical and realistic. When the author was going abroad for higher studies, she knew the importance of higher studies and she knew that the author had to go out to study and achieve something in life and have a career of his own. So she was happy that he was going abroad, but of course she was going to miss him. So she was realistic about his educational graph. Then she was also blessed with a very strong willpower. She went to see him off despite the fact that she was so old. She went to the station to see him off. And even after 5 years, when he was coming back, she went to receive him. So she had the strong willpower that she would live, even though the author had doubts when she kissed him, uh, when she came to say goodbye to him at the station. He was not sure whether he would be seeing her again, and maybe that was the last physical contact with him. But she had a strong willpower and she lived on till the day the author comes back. The other feature is that she was very intuition. When the doctor came to check her when she was feeling sick, he said there was nothing to worry, but she knew her intuition told her that she was in her last phase of life and she would soon be leaving this world. So that intuition was very, very strong in her. And to sum up all these features is another great feature that the grandmother was blessed with, and that was she was very stoic by nature. Stoicism was there in her. Stoic means to bear pain without complaining. All the suffering, all the loneliness, and all the seclusion that she was enduring, she never complained. She never uttered a word about anything. She bore it all very, very courageously. And that is why we can say that she was a stoic lady. She had a lot of stoicism in her. With that, we can sum up her character with all these features. And coming to the contemporary scenario today, we feel that the old people, the grandparents, are not getting so much attention. With the coming in of nuclear families and the disintegration of the joint family system, these old parents are left on their own to fend for themselves, which is really heartbreaking because these parents have sacrificed so much to bring up their children and to see them go places. And then in the end, when we just give up on them and leave them on their own, it is a sad plight. So, a moralistic contemporary approach would be to look after these old parents because they don't want anything at that stage. They only want love and they just want a little bit of attention, that somebody speaks to them, somebody gives them company. That is all they ask for. So we must make it a point to look after our old parents and grandparents and give them a joyous life. Thank you for watching the video.